Have you ever heard a phrase that instantly gave you goosebumps? Those words that cut through your subconscious like a knife through glass, unmistakably indicating you are being manipulated even when everything around you seems logical and reasonable. In this article, I will reveal 5 phrases, markers that the great psychologist Carl Jung predicted 100 years ago. By mastering them, you will acquire a unique lie detector, the ability to instantly recognize hidden influence where others see only a normal conversation. The point is that professional manipulators, whether in personal relationships, business, or politics, use special speech patterns. These are not random words, but carefully honed psychological tools that bypass our consciousness, acting directly on the subconscious. Carl Jung identified and described these patterns back in the early 20th century. Most astonishingly, they have hardly changed over the past century. As one of Jung's followers noted, technologies, fashion, and social norms change, but the mechanisms of psychological influence remain the same, like the laws of physics. Most worryingly, these marker phrases are constantly present in our daily communication. They are heard in the offices of large companies, at family dinners, in political debates, and even in kindergartens. As a colleague once told me, manipulation is like the oxygen of modern society, invisible but ubiquitous. Today, I will thoroughly analyze 5 specific speech patterns that Jung and his followers consider unmistakable indicators of hidden influence. These are, in a way, red flags. Noticing these phrases, you will immediately understand that you are not dealing with sincere communication, but with an attempt to control your consciousness. But I want to warn you, this knowledge will change your perception forever. As one of my mentors said, becoming aware of manipulation is like turning on the light in a dark room. There is no going back to the darkness. You will start noticing these patterns everywhere. In the words of a boss who cares about your well-being, in the speeches of politicians promising a bright future, even in the smiling phrases of salespeople who sincerely want to help you. Most difficultly, you will discover them in communication with loved ones whom you have trusted for years. To understand the mechanism of manipulation, according to Jung, it is important to realize one fundamental psychological law. We receive only 7% of information through words. The remaining 93% is intonations, gestures, facial expressions, and other nonverbal signals. However, professional manipulators act with surgical precision, focusing precisely on that 7% because words are the most controllable and least noticeable tool of influence. My client, Irina, a brilliant lawyer, 35 years old, is a striking example of how even highly intelligent people fall into the traps of manipulators. Despite her sharp analytical mind, she ended up in toxic relationships 3 times in a row. The turning point came when, recording her conversations with a partner, she discovered a surprising pattern. Before each episode of emotional abuse, the same phrases were heard as if from a pre-written script. It was like déjà vu, she later confessed. It was as if they were all reading the same manipulation guide. Most people mistakenly believe that manipulation is simply lying or direct pressure, but Jung penetrated much deeper into the nature of this phenomenon. True manipulation works at the level of the subconscious, not changing your thoughts directly, but gradually restructuring your system of perceiving reality itself. This is like a computer virus that does not delete files, but subtly changes the algorithms for processing them. Jung introduced the concept of shadow projection, a process in which the manipulator unconsciously attributes his hidden motives, fears, and shortcomings to you. Imagine someone secretly hanging their emotional baggage on you, and you, without understanding this, begin to drag that load as your own. The result is what Jung calls psychic infection, a state where the manipulator's distorted reality gradually becomes your own. Remember when you last left a conversation feeling strangely empty, with an unexplained sense of guilt or a ridiculous responsibility for someone else's problems? If you are now nodding in agreement, here is the key realization. The very fact that you are able to notice this state indicates a high level of emotional intelligence. Paradoxically, studies show that people with developed empathy are more often victims of manipulation. This is confirmed by the work of Mexican scientists from UNAM. It turned out that those with high IQ and emotional intelligence, due to their natural tendency for trust and empathy, are especially vulnerable to skilled manipulators. As one researcher said, the irony is that it is the best human qualities, the ability to empathize, trust, and the desire to see good in people, that make us targets for those who imitate these qualities. In the modern world where our attention is constantly bombarded with streams of information and social networks, accustom us to superficial perception of communication, natural psychological defenses weaken. We have become like a sponge absorbing any suggestion, especially when wrapped in attractive packaging. But understanding Jungian principles provides a powerful tool for resistance. Especially important is that, according to Jung's observations, many manipulators act unconsciously. Their words and actions are dictated by the so-called shadow self, repressed unconscious parts of the personality. This explains why, even after being exposed, they often sincerely do not understand what they are accused of. As one of Jung's followers noted, the true master of manipulation believes in his sincerity more than his victim. In the following sections, we will thoroughly analyze specific marker phrases, learn to recognize them in everyday communication, and master effective techniques of psychological self-defense. You will learn how to turn the knowledge gained not into a source of paranoia, but into a tool for building truly healthy and sincere relationships in all areas of life. These words and expressions act like an X-ray, instantly revealing a person's true intentions, even if he has been hiding behind a mask of goodwill for years. Carl Jung, the founder of analytical psychology, identified 5 specific speech patterns in the early 20th century that portray a manipulator with frightening accuracy. These phrases remain relevant today because the psychology of human relationships does not change as quickly as technology. One of the most insidious phrases that manipulators use is, "I'm just being honest with you." At first glance, this looks like a manifestation of sincerity, but in reality, it turns out to be a subtle form of aggression. Jung explained that in this way, the manipulator shifts responsibility for his harsh words onto the concept of honesty itself. A paradoxical situation is created. If you react negatively to what is said, you automatically become an opponent of the truth. This is a classic example of how aggression is masked as virtue. In real life, this can manifest itself like this. After an offensive remark, a person adds, "I'm just saying it as it is," as if implying that the problem is not in his words but in your excessive sensitivity. Jung called this projection of the shadow when a person attributes his own negative qualities to others. Even more dangerous is the phrase, "you're exaggerating," which is a pure example of gaslighting, a psychological manipulation aimed at making a person doubt their own perception of reality. Interestingly, Jung described this mechanism long before the term gaslighting entered the psychological lexicon. When a manipulator tells you that you are exaggerating, he is actually denying your right to your own emotions and experiences. This is especially insidious because it attacks the very foundation of the human psyche, the ability to trust your feelings. In such situations, Jung advised paying attention to your feelings after the conversation. If you feel emptiness, confusion, or unexplained guilt, it is quite possible that you have fallen victim to such manipulation. A special place in Jung's list is occupied by the phrase, "I've done so much for you," which reveals the so-called martyr complex. Behind the outward nobility, here lies a cold calculation. The manipulator keeps an invisible accounting of his good deeds in order to present the bill at the right moment. Jung emphasized that true help does not require reminders of itself. It is valuable in itself. When a person constantly lists what he has done for you, this indicates his hidden expectations and unhealthy relationships built not on sincerity, but on mutual calculations. In such cases, help ceases to be a selfless act and turns into an instrument of control. The phrase, "you made me do it," demonstrates another classic manipulative technique, shifting responsibility. Jung considered this a sign of psychological immaturity when a person is unable to be responsible for their actions and looks for someone to blame outside. In reality, no one can force an adult to feel or do anything. Our reactions are always our personal choice. When a manipulator blames you for their actions, they are trying to establish control through guilt. Jung called this projection a defense mechanism of the psyche when a person attributes their own unacceptable thoughts and actions to others. Another phrase, "if you loved me, you would," which represents pure emotional blackmail. In this case, feeling is made dependent on the fulfillment of certain conditions, which completely contradicts the nature of sincere relationships. Jung warned that such manipulations are especially dangerous because they exploit the deepest human needs for love, acceptance, and belonging. When relationships turn into a system of conditions and demands, this indicates serious psychological problems in the manipulator. One of the most insidious phrases that manipulators use is the manipulator skillful. Thus, the manipulator not only avoids responsibility for his own emotions, but also makes you feel guilty for something you did not control. But the most dangerous of all manipulative phrases, Jung considered, if you love me, you would. This seemingly simple construction represents a powerful tool of emotional blackmail. A Stanford University study conducted in 2023 showed that 91% of victims of domestic violence regularly heard this phrase from their partners. The essence of this manipulation is that the manipulator redefines the very concept of love, turning it from an unconditional feeling into a system of requirements and obligations. You are offered an impossible choice. Either you sacrifice your boundaries, comfort, and even principles, or you automatically become a bad partner, friend, or relative who is unable to love truly. Jung called this psychological violence in its purest form because such manipulation attacks the very foundations of the human psyche, the need for love and acceptance. In everyday life, this can manifest itself in a variety of situations. For example, a friend tells you, a true friend would have already helped, but you didn't even offer, although in reality, you just didn't realize that he needed help. Or a partner declares, if you really valued me, you wouldn't argue with me, turning a healthy discussion into proof of your lack of love. Especially insidiously, this manipulation works in relationships between parents and adult children when phrases like, if you loved us, you would call more often, are used for control and guilt. Jung developed a simple but extremely effective method of counteracting such manipulations. The first step he called maintaining attention on opposites. When you hear one of these manipulative phrases, it is important not to give in to the first reaction, neither aggression nor compliance. Instead, it is worth calmly noting, I notice that you are saying repeat his phrase instead of answering my words. This technique works because it brings manipulation to the conscious level, depriving it of its main weapon, secrecy. The manipulator loses control of the situation because his scheme becomes obvious to all participants in the conversation. The second important step is to listen to your body. Jung particularly emphasized that our body always knows the truth, even when the mind gets confused in logical constructions. Put your hand on your chest, take a deep breath, and listen to your feelings. Do you feel tightness in your stomach, heaviness in your chest, sudden fatigue? These physical reactions are nothing more than signals from your psyche, which is screaming, this is manipulation. The body never lies, unlike words, which can be skillfully chosen and masked. The third step is to break the dynamics of manipulation. To do this, it is enough to say, I need time to think about your words. This simple phrase acts on the manipulator like a cold shower because it deprives him of the main instrument of influence, immediate impact, and the demand for an immediate reaction. You regain control of the situation and time for a sober assessment of what is happening. Jung noted that when he first applied this technique in his personal life, the manipulator in his environment literally lost his temper, which became the best proof of his true intentions. But why do manipulators behave in this way? Jung concluded that manipulation is based on deep fear and flight from oneself. The manipulator, as a rule, is not aware of his true motives and uses psychological influence as a defense mechanism against his own fears, insecurities, and vulnerabilities. He does not want or cannot take responsibility for his emotions and actions, and therefore shifts it to others. At the same time, people with high emotional intelligence most often become victims of manipulation, precisely because they are prone to trust, empathy, and the desire to correct, understand, or help another person. Protection from manipulation begins with awareness of these mechanisms. It is important to learn to recognize these 5 key marker phrases that act as unique red flags in communication. No less important is to stop making excuses because it is your kindness and desire to maintain relationships that the manipulator plays on. Most importantly, learn